Welcome to the Mongabay Newscast. I am your host, Mike DiGirolamo, bringing you the news and inspiration from nature's frontline. Mongabay staff writer Abhishyant Kidangoor, who covers all things conservation tech, recently visited Singapore to speak with 13 contestants of a 5-year-long conservation technology competition, culminating in a $10 million prize. The premise of the competition is to identify technologies that can automate the assessment of rainforest biodiversity. The nonprofit in charge of the competition, the California-based XPRIZE Foundation, will select finalists this month, who will then move on to the final round next year, in 2024, where teams will have the chance to showcase improvements to their technology. In his reporting for us, Abhi witnessed many different types of projects that incorporated the use of robotics, machine learning, and also drones. In this interview you're about to hear, he speaks with Peter Houlihan, a tropical ecologist and the Executive Vice President of Biodiversity and Conservation at the XPRIZE Foundation. Houlihan talks about the competition, what motivated XPRIZE to launch it, why they chose to host it in Singapore, and why he says it has now become a movement. And he also shares his thoughts on the state of conservation technology in general. Please note that since this interview is recorded outside, some ambient noise may still be present in the audio.
To get started, you're a long way away from home. Tell me what you're doing in Singapore.
Home is an interesting concept. We're here in Singapore for the semifinals of XPRIZE Rainforest, which is a 5-year competition aimed at incentivizing teams from around the world to develop new technologies that can rapidly and autonomously monitor species in tropical rainforests, measure biodiversity, and help us ultimately develop new insights about the health, the well-being, and the value of standing tropical rainforests. So over the past 3.5 years since XPRIZE Rainforest was launched in the end of 2019, we started with 300 teams from 70 countries, and over these past couple of years, our judging panel has selected the best teams at each round to advance, and Singapore was selected to host the semifinals. And this is actually the first opportunity that our teams have had the opportunity to test their technologies in the field. Some of them may have done it on their own wherever they live, or traveled to nearby areas to test their technologies. But it's the first time that our judges and our staff are getting the opportunity to witness what they've been developing and designing.
And how has it been going?
It has been a whirlwind. So I will start by saying it's been going extremely well. It's really been quite an endeavor building this program. And to be honest, it was partway through our first testing window where I finally got a moment to just sit back and watch these robotics and drones being operated, and just the determination of the teams problem solving on the spot. To me, all of my background is field biology and conservation and rainforests, and so much of what is entailed to be successful at that is just being adaptable, understanding that tropical rainforests are challenging environments. Tech in particular does not really always perform the way you anticipate in rainforests. They're really harsh conditions of moisture and humidity, as well as just really complex, tangled, vegetation. In Southeast Asia where we are, the forests can be extremely tall. And on top of that, when you're deploying technologies over a longer period of time, you also have other impacts of, over a long period of time, maybe termites and ants. As some of our teams saw the other day, they had a few little run-ins with monkeys, and so the monkeys were quite interested, and the macaques here are quite intelligent, and so they either mess around with things because they're curious, or sometimes the way that they come across, you wonder if they're just doing it out of fun or just to pester the teams. And so anyway, long story short, that part has been really cool after these 3.5 years of developing this prize, to actually see the moment we've been waiting for, to see these teams come together to test their technologies, but also, as you saw at our opening ceremony, there's been a whole wide range of support, not only here in Singapore, but it's been a global movement of people who are like-minded, have a shared common vision, but are also solution-oriented and focused on what can we do about the realities, not only in tropical rainforests, but the planet? Understanding that, what can we actually do about it?
I'm curious to know what the XPRIZE Foundation's goal is with this competition. Where do you intend this going?
So XPRIZE runs global prize incentivized competitions aimed at driving solutions in areas that have notoriously faced certain barriers, or there has been a difficulty in driving breakthroughs. Sometimes there are too many silos within different sectors or between sectors, between whether it's academia or NGOs or governments, private sector. And so especially in conservation, there's a need to collaborate, for people to work together across many different fields. To me, it's certainly a technology competition. How can we condense the speed at which we collect data and analyze data? Closing that bottleneck is a huge goal, but what I've learned in the time that I've been at XPRIZE is even though we run competitions, it fosters collaboration. And so I've seen people come together in ways that I've never seen before in our field. And I think a big part of that is people being solution-oriented, people being positive. It's very easy, especially in conservation or any area of study around the planet today, to be very doom and gloom. But we don't really have time to dwell on those things. I think we need to process that in our own way and be tactical in terms of how we respond and what we do about it. So, XPRIZE Rainforest, to me, I think when I first joined, we really wanted to shorten that amount of time. We used to spend months at a time in the field collecting data on individual species or groups of species. It's very time and labor intensive to do field work in rainforests. And then after that, the data analysis can also be very laborious. And so with the speed at which we're losing rainforests around the world, we need to get to a point of informing change or changing policy or decision making at a much quicker turnaround. And so that's what XPRIZE Rainforest is really focused on, is how can we enhance the tools at our disposal and that of people on the ground, whether it's conservation managers, park rangers, indigenous communities. It's not aimed at replacing anybody, but what can we actually do to support those individuals with faster tools, with tools that can aid in what people need to do on the ground to just be more effective and to be able to monitor, manage, and protect areas at scale.
You earlier mentioned that a lot of people that you know came together and collaborated after being part of this community. Could you give me an example?
You know what, I think the semifinals here, the example that first comes to mind is the entire country of Singapore. So when we were scouting different areas around the world for where testing could take place, there are a lot of options. There are a lot of great rainforests. We couldn't have really gone wrong in terms of many areas with respect to the forest. What we needed to host such a global competition were also the infrastructure, the willingness to foster those relationships, especially the drone areas. Interestingly, when we came to the conclusion to host the semifinals here, Singapore has very strict drone laws. It also has a very congested airspace. But the Minister of National Development here, Desmond Lee, was really an advocate of, we are a city in nature. Even where we're sitting right now in the middle of the city is a very green space. And Singapore has also been very innovative and focused on sustainability, especially with respect to technology. And there were just a lot of good alignments. We never could have imagined the amount of work and effort and collaboration that would be required to host it here, or after doing it here, realizing the amount that it will take anywhere. We've set quite a high bar, but from the minister to the heads of the Air Force, the Civil Aviation, National University of Singapore, NParks, which has been overseeing and leading an entire XPRIZE Rainforest Secretariat, the Singapore Tourism Board, all these local NGOs and international NGOs that have hubs here, you name it. I think it's really been a collective in terms of partners, and that's something that I hope that our teams that are coming to semifinals witness, experience, and learn from in terms of how they build and integrate their solutions anywhere that they work in the world. So to me, that's been a really inspiring aspect of it. I was also, before even coming here for testing, before any of our teams deployed their technologies for the first time, the impact that the prize has achieved has been really inspiring. And I think, again, that's just this collective movement. The prize was launched right before the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, and so many things around the world came to a stop. All the work that I was doing internationally in rainforests came to a stop. That's actually when I joined XPRIZE. And throughout that period, we learned that it was actually a program that had the sponsorship from our sponsor, Alana Foundation, to carry on and do this over 5 years, when all of these other projects were understandably coming to a stop or being put on hold. But the conservation implications of this couldn't be put on hold. We really needed to be doing this, and I think that we maybe got more engagement in a bizarre way because people still had that motivation and drive to commit to doing something. And so despite even my team, we didn't even meet in person for over a year after I started at XPRIZE, but we were able to, through the virtual world, unite people across the planet that, again, have that shared common vision and goal for the future. So before we even got to the testing, to me, that level of just unity was already a success. That was already a indescribable impact that, while the prize is focused on technology and it's a vehicle for that, it's much bigger than just the technology alone. So I've always viewed our competitions as somewhat of a long-term conference where people come together for some type of subject matter area expertise, but you unite with one another over the dinners, the receptions, the happy hours, the things that happen on the periphery where people are really just networking and fostering those ideas. So anyway, long story short, I've been thrilled with how things have been going, and both the local collaboration here in Singapore, but then globally, to me, will ultimately be the legacy of XPRIZE Rainforest.
And so is that what you meant when you said this has now gone beyond the competition and has become a movement?
Yeah, it's much bigger than that. And I think everybody feels it, especially when we come together. At the opening ceremony, that was really our objective, is bringing together all of the different parties that have made this possible and are committed to it. The technologies will, of course, be a huge aspect that changes the way in which, the tools in which we do the work on the ground. But I also think that we've brought together people that have never worked together before. People are looking at driving solutions differently. We've basically, with this prize, drawn a box and told people to exist outside of it. And they've found ways to innovate collaborations, not just the technologies.
And regardless of who wins or not, what do you hope that these projects will go on to do in the future?
To be honest with you, I'm not particularly concerned about what individual team wins. I'm rooting for everybody, and it's ultimately that cohort pushing the needle forward, that if it was just one team throughout this whole process, it wouldn't have the same impact as 300 teams from the beginning, these top 13 teams that we have now. Ultimately, the goal is for these solutions to be scalable and to work in any rainforest in the world. And if, having worked in different rainforests across the globe, understanding the challenges of working in that environment, understanding the bureaucracy, just the measures that it takes to establish protected areas or community managed areas, oftentimes it requires data. And if these tools can help people anywhere in the world collect the data necessary to inform those policies and that management, that would be success. And so there's still vast rainforests across the globe that we hardly know much, if anything, about. Of course, there are many areas around the world where There's a lot of indigenous and traditional knowledge that also needs to be integrated into solutions and decision making, and those individuals need to be involved in the decision making. But there are still also vast areas as well that are, parks that are the size of entire countries that we hardly know what species we're even protecting if there is a protected area. So that to me is the exciting part, is still the amount that is that remains to be understood. And if we can improve those understandings, I think the insights from this competition are also focused on how can we better value nature. Everybody in this competition, I think, has an intrinsic appreciation for nature, but clearly in terms of the world that we live in, we haven't been able to communicate the value of biodiversity well enough to economically incentivize people to protect it.
But how do you ensure that these projects are then financed and funded and scaled up?
So the cool thing is that XPRIZE just completed a historic impact study focused on our last 28, 29 years of competitions, which found on average our prize purses catalyze about 31 times that amount in investment into our teams, which is remarkable. That's a great return. In this prize, it's a $10 million competition, and throughout the prize, we've really focused on connecting our teams with possible donors, investors, philanthropies, VCs, angel investors that share that goal and mission and are interested in technologies that can monitor biodiversity. It's also a reason why, on top of many, that Singapore was a good option in terms of hosting here, because it wasn't just the rainforest testing, it was also exposing our teams to this ecosystem, this community, which Singapore actually has a really high density of investors focused on the environment. And so throughout this competition already, we have had a number of teams secure millions of dollars of investment into their technologies, into the companies that they've developed, and we hope that only continues to grow.
I have two more questions.
Yeah, you're good.
One, broadly speaking, you're someone who has spent a significant amount of time studying rainforests. How have you seen conservation technology evolve, and how is it faring at the moment?
I've seen conservation evolve or lack thereof. I feel that for a long time the word conservation technology was this trendy term that was somewhat of a catch-all, and when you really dove into it, you realize people were just talking about buying, over-the-counter camera traps and just strapping them to trees. And that wasn't really the most technologically advanced way of doing anything in terms of conservation. Camera traps are extremely useful, and they will always, be able to support us in those efforts. But to be honest, I really think that my background in tropical biology and ecology is, I feel that we've failed to a certain degree, not only in the tech space, but also we just need more people from different backgrounds and different expertise applying that to conservation. So I've always felt that we need more engineers, we need more lawyers, more economists, people focused on these challenges and applying different perspectives, not only having an academic, biological, sequential career path. So that's one. I think that's where, we'll be in the field and you're grappling with what tech as a field biologist you're aware of, and then, years later somebody's like, oh, there's something for that. It just hasn't been adopted or adapted to a rainforest setting or just an outdoor setting or something like that. So I think that's where the prize has really forced people to think about things differently, because the challenge itself has driven the necessity for people to bring people together that they haven't worked with before. So at the beginning of the prize, we did a lot of matchmaking, and you would have people like myself that are tropical ecologists, but maybe don't have the engineering experience, or maybe a team was lacking the drone expertise, and they were realizing those gaps, and we would just foster virtual events, bringing people together. And you had those engineers that were saying, I really feel that I have something I could contribute to this challenge. but I've never been to a rainforest before. Who can work with me? And that, to me, was really a formidable way to bring people together to form these comprehensive teams. And so that's one way. I don't think that we've been compiling holistic teams to focus on this challenge. The challenge facing, rainforests and the planet writ large. But I also just feel that because rainforests are a really challenging environment to work in, it's kind of driven a bottleneck of certain types of people end up gravitating towards that type of work, and maybe we all haven't been the most innovative. There are people on our judging panel that are leaders in this space, but I'm hoping the prize gets people thinking about this differently, and as a whole the movement just brings more people. It makes it more inclusive so that you don't have to just have a specific academic pedigree to be driving a solution. If you're committed to driving change, you can contribute something, and that's the whole point of what XPRIZE is about.
Perfect. That's what I wanted to ask. But I'm just also curious to know what technology excites you, like with all that we have.
To be honest, it's really been an exciting process. Of course, the autonomous and remote nature of this competition has driven towards many teams using different UAVs. And the autonomous nature for us was really, if they can operate these types of these solutions in a certain amount of space, then they could be scalable beyond that. And that's where drones have really progressed a long way. In the past 10 or 15 years, I've been using drones in rainforests for a long time, but they've advanced so far. And what I've seen with our teams is pretty mind-blowing. And it's exciting to actually see, again, drones being developed for a variety of different purposes, but here they're being developed for good to help people monitor really large areas and support their protection. So I think the mode in which teams are getting out there in the forest with drones is really exciting. We also have a lot of teams using innovative approaches with eDNA. eDNA has also really evolved quite a bit, no pun intended, as well as audio monitoring. Of course, teams are using different types of imagery, but now they're able to also use AI and machine learning to run that imagery off of online libraries and identify species in real time. And that's really, again, getting at that point of the bottleneck of identifying species, the time it takes to do that, and doing those analyses. So I'm really excited about all of those approaches. There's also a lot of LiDAR, not only in terms of scanning the forest and understanding the structure, but how can we also use that structure to help inform how these drones and robotics navigate the forest? It's such a dense, complex environment in a three-dimensional space that it's very hard to navigate in that respect as well. So I'm excited about all of these different aspects. I'm also excited that there are new ways to study the canopy. I was an entomologist by training, and so that's why I gravitated to rainforests in the first place, but then also into the canopy, where not only is there just a lot that we don't know yet, but the diversity of so many different groups of species is highest up in the canopy. So I've been thrilled with what I've already seen, and it's also, again, more scalable. For a long time, we've been viewing everything in the rainforest from one perspective on the ground, and that's 1.5, 2 meters above the forest floor and looking up. And through my career being able to climb trees, you get a totally different perspective, but you're still fixed to one tree. You can change that. You're not as fixed as a canopy tower, but with drones now, the sky is literally the limit.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you want to read more about the competition hosted by the XPRIZE Foundation, please see links to Abhi's coverage here in the show notes, including a Q&A with technical lead at XPRIZE, Kevin Marriott. And as always, if you enjoy the Mongabay Newscast and you want to help us out, you can spread the word by telling a friend about the show, because that's the best way to help expand our reach and keep growing. But if you want, you can also support us by becoming a monthly sponsor via our Patreon page at patreon.com/Mongabay. As we are a non-profit news outlet, even just $1 per month will really help us offset the production costs. So if you're a fan of our audio reports from Nature's Frontline, head to patreon.com/Mongabay to learn more and support the Mongabay Newscast. You and your friends can join the listeners who have downloaded the Mongabay Newscast over 500,000 times by subscribing to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts from, or you can download our app for Apple and Android devices. Just search either App Store for the Mongabay Newscast app to gain fingertip access to new shows and all of our previous episodes. As always, you can read our news and inspiration from Nature's Frontline at mongabay.com, or if you prefer to keep up with us on social media, find Mongabay on most of the social platforms out there, including Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, Mastodon, and many others, with our handle at Mongabay, or on Twitter at Mongabay.org. Thanks as always for listening.